Okay, we're in section 2 now. Okay, so let's do the first couple here that have fill in the blanks. The sum of two negative numbers will always be, well, if you have a negative number, which is to the left of 0, and you make it more negative, and you go more towards the negative side, it will still be a negative number. Of course, a positive number times a positive number is positive, but the negative number times plus a positive number, it could be either negative or positive, but depending upon which one of them has a larger value. The sum of a number and its opposite will always be 0. So we call that an additive inverse, but so we can also call it opposite. So the opposite, say you had 6, the opposite of 6 is plus 6. You add those two together, you get 0. So the answer is 0. To simplify the expression 8 plus the quantity -2 plus the quantity -3 plus 5, I should begin by adding something and something according to the rules for operation. So you always take the innermost, let me just write this down. So you take the innermost grouping. So let's just look at it. So this is an outer grouping, and then this is innermost grouping. So what we would do is we would take -3 plus 5 as our first operation, which is 2. Then you would, they don't ask you this, but then you would go to the next grouping. So you would have, basically what you'd have is this part would become -2 plus 2. So you'd have -2 plus 2, which would be 0, and then you would do 8 plus 0, which is 8. So that's kind of the order operation. If I am adding a positive number and a negative number, and the negative number has a larger absolute value, the sum will be positive or negative. Okay, so let's think about that on a number line. So let's say here's 0, here's your positive number, call it A, and it says the negative number, and you're adding them together. So you basically, if you add a positive and a negative number, and I'm saying B has higher absolute value. So when you have this negative number, the actual distance here is larger than the distance from there to there. So, okay, so adding a positive number. So when the absolute value of this is greater than that, then you're going to end up on this side of the 0. If this was greater, this distance from here to here were greater than the distance from there to there, then you would be on the positive side. It's kind of like if you took the average of those two numbers, you'd come out somewhere, not at 0, but you'd come out negative, and that's going to give you an idea of which side it's on as well. Anyway, so the answer is negative. Explain in words how to add signs and numbers. Consider the varying cases and give examples. Okay. So let's say you add 2 negative numbers. So when you have 2 negative numbers, well, we're adding, so you add the negative, which is the same as subtracting, but that's for later. So adding 2 negative numbers, they're both on the left-hand side. So this number should be more on the left-hand side. So what you do is you add the numbers, and then you add put the negative sign in front of it. So you'll have 5 plus 8 is 5 plus 3 is 8, so you get -8. If you have 2 positive numbers, you just add them together, and they stay on the positive side. Now, in terms of if you have a negative number plus a positive number, one way of looking at it is you can take the absolute value of -3 and the absolute value of 7. And if this is going to be 3, and if this is 7, then what results is you're going to be on the, because this is more to the right of 0 than this is to the left of 0, you end up on the positive side. So then I'm trying to think if that's just more complicated or not, but anyway, that's how I would explain it. Now if you did it the other way, if you had -8 plus 5, because the negative part is larger than the positive part, then the answer is going to be negative, and then you take the difference between these two, which, well, if you took the difference between the absolute values, if you subtracted the larger, so I guess what you do is you always subtract the smaller from the larger. You get 4, and that's the value, and because this absolute value is greater than this absolute value, then you use positive. In the second case, if you took the absolute value of negative 8, and then you had the absolute value of 5, absolute value of 5, what we would get is positive 8 and positive 5. So again, you subtract the smaller number from the larger number, which is 3, but because the absolute value of the negative number is greater than the absolute value of the positive number, then the answer would be negative 3. Okay, let's go to 7. Perform the indicated operations using the order of operations. Okay, so what we're doing is we're adding two negative numbers. And we said if you had two negative numbers, you get a larger negative number. You just add the two numbers, and you put the negative sign. Okay, we have negative 6 plus 17. Because the absolute value of this is greater than the absolute value of that, it's going to be a positive number. And we just take 17 minus 6, the absolute value. We subtract the larger number from the smaller number. I mean, small number from the larger number, which is 11. So this is going to be positive 11, because the positive part was larger. The absolute value was larger. 13. So we have negative 5 plus 11 plus 3. Well, one way of doing it would be just to add the positive numbers together first, and then use the same idea here. So this is larger than that, because this is larger than that. The absolute value of this is larger than that. Then we know that it's going to be positive, and then we just subtract this number from the positive number. So we get 9. Okay, number 16. 15 minus a negative 6 minus a negative 8. Well, you always want to, when you have the double negative like this, you always want to go ahead and make that a positive. So we have 15, instead of minus a minus 6, it becomes positive 6. Minus a minus 8 becomes a positive 8. And then we just add the numbers together. So 15 plus 6 is 21. 21 plus 8 is 29. Okay, 19. Negative 12 times negative 2. Anytime you multiply two numbers together that are negatives of each other, are both negatives, then the result is positive. So we get a positive, and 12 times 2 is 24. 22. So we have negative 5 times negative 17 times 2 times negative 2 times positive 4. Okay, so what's the answer? Well, if you have an even number of negative signs, the result is positive. If you have an odd number of negative signs, the result is negative. So in this case, before we had two negatives, which was even, so we get a positive. In this case, we have 1, 2, 3 negatives. Therefore, the answer is going to be negative. And then we just multiply everything together. So you have 5 times 17 times 2 times 2 times 4, and we get 1,360. So it's usually best to just look at the signs first, instead of thinking negative times negative is positive, positive, positive is positive, positive times negative is negative, negative times positive, positive, negative. You get confused. Best thing to do is go 1, 2, 3. How many are 3? It's odd, so it's negative. And then multiply all the numbers together. Okay. Okay, 25. 36 divided by negative 6. Well, just like with multiplication, if you divide a negative by a negative, you get a positive. If you divide a positive by a positive, you get positive. But if the signs are opposite, then it's negative. It's also an odd number of negative signs. So the same thing applies here. So since there's one negative, that's odd, and therefore it's negative. 36 divided by 6 is 6. Negative 6. Okay, 28. 0 divided by negative 7. Any number 0 divided by any number is 0. Doesn't have to be positive or negative. We don't have negative 0 because 0 has neither positive or negative sign. So the answer is 0. 31. Negative 4 minus 3 times negative 2 plus 5 squared. So anytime you have an exponent, you want to do that first. Well, maybe not first, but it's the head of any other operation that we have here. So we get negative 4. Go ahead and multiply these two together. Negative times a negative, it's even, so it's going to be positive. 3 times 2 is 6, plus 5 squared, which is 25. Probably first we do that and then we do that, but I just did them in one step. Okay, now, the sum of the positive numbers is greater than the negative number. Therefore, the result is going to be positive. So we take 25 plus 6, which is 31, minus 7, which is 27. So the answer would be 27. Negative 10 plus 4 times negative 3 divided by negative 7 minus 2. So first thing we do is we do the parentheses. Negative 10 plus 4. This is the negative part's greater than the positive part, so the answer is going to be negative. And we subtract the smaller from the larger absolute value. So basically what this is it's going to be negative. We can think of it as negative the absolute value of 10 minus the absolute value of 4. Why is that? Because I'm taking the larger number, the larger absolute value, and subtracting off the smaller absolute value. This gives us 6, and because the negative part's larger than the positive part, it's going to be negative. Okay. So the result from that is negative 6. So the equation now becomes negative 6 times negative 3 divided by negative 7 minus 2. Now, when you have a rational function like this where you have a quotient, you always want to carry out everything in the numerator all the way and the denominator all the way. So we're going to have negative 6 times negative 3, which is going to be positive 18. And in the denominator we have negative 7 minus 2. So because these are both negative, we add the absolute values and make it negative, so it becomes negative 9. 18 divided by negative 9 is negative 2. Okay, we'll do one more in this grouping. 37. Negative 6 plus 3 times negative 4 divided by negative 5 minus 1. Again, you want to do what's in the parentheses. The negative part's larger than the positive part. Subtract the larger absolute value from the smaller from the larger, so you get 6 minus 3 is 3. The result is negative because the negative portion is greater. The negative absolute value. The absolute value of the negative part is larger. Okay, and the rest of it is like this. Again, we do the numerator and denominator separately. Finish it out. So negative 3 times negative 4 is positive 12. And negative 5 minus 1 just becomes more negative. So we add 5 and 1 and make it negative, which is 6. And so we get negative 2 here. 12 divided by 6 is 2, and we only have an odd number of negatives, so it stays negative.